We are so grateful to COCC for sponsoring this year's series. They were chosen largely because we went to the list of best workplaces in this region, and they consistently showed up as a best workplace. So who better than a group like COCC, which models healthy culture, to come forward and underwrite this series. We are grateful to COCC. We are equally grateful to all of the sponsors of Leadership Greater Hartford this year. Let's go to the next slide. Look at all the different organizations that decided to support our work this year. These are visionary sponsors, and everything that we are doing this year to make this possible, and including making some of the new seminars free of charge, are a result of the support we're getting from a wide variety of our organizational partners. Please, next slide. So let's make sure that you are connecting with all of your social media friends. For all of you social mavens out there, of which I am certainly not one, these are your handles. Use Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, carrier pigeon, or whatever your favorite vehicle might be. Let them know that you're here with Leadership Greater Hartford at Lessons in Leadership. So who's in the room? You know, nearly all of our graduates of one LGH program or another are in this room, or at least all of the people in this room are graduates of our program. Most of the alumni come from our Quest program, which is our signature program. But we like to say that wherever you are and whatever you're looking for at this stage of your leadership journey, we have a program for you. Go to our website, leadershipgh.org, to learn about the various ways we can help you develop, connect, and engage as a leader. Check out this. Who's in the room today? We strive to be a trusted resource for people in every sector of our economy. We have relationships with literally hundreds of different organizations, at least 40 of which are represented today. You'll note that we have Fortune 500 corporations among the various businesses that you see identified there in blue. We've got small businesses there as well. Look at all the nonprofits that we have. They are listed, where are they listed? In the green and red, large nonprofits, small nonprofits, government agency representatives. We have retirees. We believe that diverse leaders can discover many shared interests. They can also learn from one another. They can forge meaningful partnerships with one another. But it all begins with bringing people together in a safe and meaningful way, such as through today's Lessons in Leadership session. Let's go to the next slide. We are so grateful to all of our facilitators. I referenced earlier that we'll be in breakout rooms. As is our custom, we'll break into small groups partway through this morning. And at that time, your sound will be unmuted so that you and your colleagues can hear one another. We'll want someone from your group to be ready to share what you learned when we come back together. But while in your small group, we have enlisted some wonderful people to serve as your facilitators. So we want to thank our friends Nadine Brennan, Luberik Basirovic, Tulani Davis, Michael Fournier, Beth Frechette, Howard Garvel, Raina Giddings, Elsie Gonzalez, Debbie Eno, Katie O'Leary, Joya Zach. Thank all of you for your participation today. Okay, so we're ready to begin. Let me introduce you to another great facilitator, another great leader, someone who's been studying, practicing, and teaching leadership for a long time. She's worked at the Hartford for many years, has had her own consulting business, and for the last 4 years has been working at Leadership Greater Hartford as the Director of Consulting and Training and as the Director of Summit, the program we offer to senior level people in our community. Not only does Karen know a lot about the field of leadership, she knows how to share her insights with others. She's a student of Brené Brown, among others, and she's one of the most engaging presenters I have ever met. And I believe you will thoroughly enjoy the time you get to spend with her this morning. So without further delay, I present you Karen Senteio, who will explore with us a key to creating a healthy culture and one of the great paradoxes of leadership, how being vulnerable can actually make us stronger. Let's give it up for Karen Senteio.
Jazz hands, jazz hands. Good morning, everyone. Boy, that was quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it. So it's interesting that we're talking about vulnerability today, in one of the most vulnerable times in our country. I think we're living, breathing, and walking vulnerability. And I think even Zoom is vulnerable. How many of you think Zoom is vulnerable? Jazz hands, please. What's interesting about Zoom, it gives us a peek into lives that we wouldn't necessarily see. You see the color of people's rooms, you see their children, you see their partners, you see their dogs, and you see their cats. You see another side of them that you would have never seen without this time and without Zoom. And you even see yoga pants. Yoga pants are vulnerable, but I love them. But they're vulnerable, and I think we can all agree to that. But vulnerability means cracking your heart open. It's risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, but it's also cracking our hearts open. So let's not waste this opportunity that we're getting today. And let's use vulnerability to make us stronger. So in the book, The Culture Code, they're talking about 3 skills of cultural chemistry and how to make teams great. And the 3 skills are cultivating a sense of safety, demonstrating signals of connection, shaking hands, believe it or not, eye contact, all those kind of things cultivate a sense of safety where people feel like they belong, not fit in, but belong. Sharing your vulnerability, mutual risk, and creating trusting cooperation. So that's rising, falling, and rising together again. And the third, building a sense of purpose, shared values, and shared goals. You know what's interesting and what's not lost on me is that the Culture Code is talking about teams. But when we're looking at what we're going through in this current moment, I think all 3 of these skills apply to many different areas of our lives. Our families, our state, our country, the world. So when you think about high-performing teams, we must help the people we lead navigate and manage vulnerability. What's interesting is that John Wheeler, our colleague from Clarion Group, said something the other day that I thought was exceptionally impactful. He says, as leaders, what we need to do upon re-entry and through this period is help people know what's going to stay the same, what will be different, the second thing, and third, what you don't know. And what you don't know as a leader is a vulnerable thing to let people in your organization know, and to ask them for their input in helping you navigate that new landscape. So when we think about leadership, it's not just leadership in title. Leadership means you have influence over someone, and I think that's all of us. We have leadership titles, but we have leadership moments. So all of us are in the position to lead. So all of these apply in all areas of our lives, cultivating a sense of safety, sharing your vulnerability, and building a sense of purpose. I think this is the most critical time in our country's history for all these to be in place. So the key points of the book are: group culture is the relationship between people working together to achieve a common goal and purpose. Weak group cultures are the result of focusing just on skills and neglecting interactions. This is the time for relationships. Group culture is one of the most powerful forces on the planet, and we can sense when it's absent or when it's toxic. Now, my talk today is a combination between the Culture Code and one of my favorite books from Brené Brown. Brené Brown is absolutely a vulnerability guru. And her book, Dare to Lead, is a must get. You have to get it, and particularly for this time. So my presentation is a combination of the Culture Code and Dare to Lead. And if they got married and had a baby, that would be my presentation today. Now, I love this quote from Daniel Coy. He says, culture is a set of living relationships working towards a shared goal. It's not something you are, it's something that you do. So it's something that you have to practice, and it's something that people need to see. And what I believe, it's values that have come alive. Culture is values that have come to life. And why is this important? Well, there was the topic of vulnerability is absolutely important because leaders are in the driver's seat of both. They're in the driver's seat of culture, and they're in the driver's seat of vulnerability in an organization. Last July, SHRM conducted a survey on workplace culture, and what they found is that employees directly connect toxic cultures to their leadership. So here are the results, and this was just last July. 58% of employees who quit their job due to workplace culture say their managers are the main reason why they left. 49% of American workers have thought about leaving their current jobs. That's no one in the room, though. I'm sure that's no one in the room. And 1 in 5 have left their job in the past year, and culture was the reason. And 1 to 4 dread going to work, don't feel safe voicing their opinions about work-related issues, and don't feel respected and valued in the workplace. And these stats were pre-pandemic. What do they say now? What are people feeling now? I don't know. This is what will occur if those stats don't turn around. I'm sure all of us are familiar with this group of people. But there's a silver lining. There's absolutely a silver lining. Through all the craziness that's going on right now, I think there's an opportunity for a reset. We can change the trajectory of those stats on the previous page. I can see it and I can feel it. And vulnerability is absolutely the key. What's interesting is the other day, last week, we had Peter Carlisle do a presentation. And there was one word that he said that stuck with me, and it's pono. So pono is to be in a state of harmony or balance with oneself, others, the land, work, and life itself. That word kept popping up over and over and over again. After that presentation, when I was eating my food, what did I say? Pono. When I took a shower, I said, what did I say? I said, pono. When I should be watching Schitt's Creek, what word came up? Pono. That word was speaking to me. I think we need pono in our organizations. We need cultures of pono. Now, this is a quiz, a little quiz, and I'd like for you to answer this question. I grew up believing vulnerability was just one word. And if you can text your message to the number above, our hope is that we have a word cloud. So I'll give you a couple minutes to text your answer. No word cloud? Oh, okay. All right. Weakness is the most predominant word. I see connections. I see exposed. I see crying. Not okay. I see emotions. I see connections. Okay. Okay, it looks like weakness is the biggest word there, or the most predominant word. Authentic. All these are absolute feelings that we've all had around the topic of vulnerability. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I grew up vulnerability was a slide that's not advancing. There we go. All right, so thank you for sharing that. I would say that all those answers are true, how people felt about vulnerability. What's interesting is I was raised that vulnerability was dangerous. Both my parents were from down south. So they grew up telling us, you can't be vulnerable because it's absolutely dangerous to you. So I had a lot of armor around vulnerability. And we're going to talk about the myths of vulnerability. This is from Brene Brown in Dare to Lead book. The first one, vulnerability is a weakness. And you could tell from the wordle that we just had that many of you were raised to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. It is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, but it's anything but weakness. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I don't do vulnerability. How many of you have said, I don't do vulnerability? Yeah, go on. I don't do vulnerability. But one thing that's absolutely for sure is if you don't do vulnerability, vulnerability will do you. So we all do vulnerability. I can go it alone. And, you know, it's interesting when he says, I can go it alone. And you might as well say it in a 3-year-old voice. I'll do it myself. You know, no one is meant to be alone, and particularly during the time where you're vulnerable. We're hardwired for connection. So when we're feeling vulnerable and we retreat into ourselves, that's a very dangerous place to be. You could engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. I swear, if there could be an app where you could say, make me not vulnerable, we would all buy it. Vulnerability is not a feeling we always want to experience, but it's there. Trust comes before vulnerability. I would say that these are twins. I think trust and vulnerability happen at the same time. They need each other. Trust and vulnerability are created at the same time. And vulnerability is disclosure. It's not the volume of how many times you're vulnerable or how much you're disclosing. It's the quality of what you're disclosing. It's the intent behind it. Vulnerability is not disclosure. It's not telling your innermost secrets to somebody that you just met. Vulnerability is taking a moment and sharing something. You're sharing your story with meaning. One thing I know for sure is that vulnerability is uncomfortable. And I would say that we all don't like that feeling of being vulnerable. Vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, but vulnerability is absolutely not a weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. And vulnerability is the doorway to creativity, innovation, inspiration, and love. Anything that's amazing, you have to go through the door of vulnerability. And if we numb vulnerability because we don't want to experience uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, we numb everything else. And I love this quote from Brene Brown because I think this is what affects cultures. When we pretend that we can avoid vulnerability, we engage in behaviors that are often inconsistent to who we want to be. So when our head, heart, and gut are out of alignment, and then we bring that into the workplace, or we bring that into relationships, that's what causes toxic relationships. So connecting to vulnerability reconnects us to our values, our North Star. So like I said, when our head, heart, and gut are connected, we create inspiring cultures. Our heads are involved, and we're not just talking about systems. We're not talking about system vulnerability. We're talking about relationship vulnerability. It's about speaking our truth and telling our story and never betraying yourself to any person. Now, sharing our vulnerability is displaying habits of mutual risk, and it drives trusting cooperation. Sharing vulnerability enables us to express our big ideas without fear of a judgment. It also enables us to learn from failures and speak up when things might not be working, even when it's unpopular opinion. That's the kind of environment I want to work in. I want to work in an environment where my opinion matters, where I can talk about what's important to me. Now, when you think about the fact that we're home, we're making decisions right now on what kind of culture we want upon reentry. Every day there's something that happens, you go, I want more of that, I want less of that. So when I go back in the workplace, I want to be able to be me. I want to be able to do my best work, and vulnerability is required. Now, vulnerability makes us stronger. Group discussion. Now we're getting ready to put you in your groups, and this is what I want you to think about. When did you see an act of courageous vulnerability, and what did you learn about it? Because one thing is interesting is when we see someone else, we see courage when they're being vulnerable. That's not how we see ourselves in that same situation. I want us to be able to think about how we can invite more vulnerability into our lives and be able to recognize it when we see it, especially courageous vulnerability. So we're going to put you in your rooms and you're going to discuss this. You're going to discuss situations where you've seen that and what you learned. And when we come back, I absolutely want people to share from that experience.
Will be Greg Hammond reporting from his group. So Greg, I will unmute you.
Hello,
Sure.
Greg.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Good to see you, Karen.
Nice to see you.
Our group, in sharing stories about vulnerability, talked about some leaders in a corporate setting that were allowed to share personal stories to be able to break down barriers and create better relationships with leaders. One example was an executive that shared the story of his daughter's suicide. Others have shared stories of their own challenges, both physically and mentally. We've also seen examples of graciousness and kindness. And some of the lessons that we've learned is that people tend to be kind and gracious, and we have to be willing to accept help and have courage to do that. We also spent just a few minutes talking about how vulnerability may differ between genders, situations, and generational situations.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And one of the things that Brene Brown says that I love is share with those who deserve the right to hear your story. And to be able to create an environment where that can happen is an amazing thing. And one of the things that has also been said is that even though we take on the practice of vulnerability, to your point, there are differences between what we view as acceptable for men and women. And to be able to break down those barriers where men can also feel like they can be vulnerable in the workplace, because what it does is it humanizes people. When you see people as human and not their titles, it makes such a difference makes such a difference. And I think Zoom has helped to break that down. When you're looking around at this Brady Bunch squares and you can see people in their homes, you're like, oh my God, I never thought she would have green on her walls. I love her for that. It just humanizes people, and I love that. So thank you for sharing that, Greg.
So next up, we will have Tulani Davis. Tulani, you're unmuted.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, Tulani.
Hi. So in our group, we had a wonderful speaker who immediately went to the national level to talk about Dr. Fauci and Governor Cuomo, who have been leading the charge in combating COVID and trying to be positive leaders, and also being challenged by everything else as well, whether that be the people that they serve or everything else in between, and just being good leaders for the nation overall, as a way of showing a sense of vulnerability. Then we had somebody else talk about how they watched their CEO in their first week open expressively see someone cry openly with their full staff. And so I think that's just as important, seeing someone who is your supervisor, your boss, someone who's in charge, and being completely open to being able to completely break down is a very strong sense of vulnerability. We also talked about the same person being able to laugh everything off and have a dance off with others in front of a full crowd of people, just because of the nature of who that person is, and seeing that person being able to, be vulnerable, not just in the mellow sense, but also in the positive vibrancy of that individual. And I think being vulnerable on both ends of the spectrum, is extremely important. Those were some of the major things that we talked about. We also talked about being able to being honest, and just saying that sometimes we wake up on the wrong side of the bed or have a tough morning, and being able to say that is just as vulnerable as being able to speak freely and having a positive morning as well.
Love that. It's interesting, as they say, dancing is full body vulnerability. And I think that's right. And being able to leave space for emotions. I don't know how many, but if we can do jazz hands, how many of you are having crazy emotions all over the place? Yeah, and it can run the gamut. In the morning, I can feel one way, and by the afternoon, I can feel another way, and by the evening, I can feel another way. Vulnerability also requires that we allow ourselves to feel and really kind of be able to name that feeling, be able to say, what am I feeling, and be able to sit in it, understand where it came from, why it's there, and what you need to or do not need to do about it. And I have a feeling that when we go back to re-entry, we're going to have to leave some space for emotions because it's going to be emotional. Imagine that first day when you go back in the office and you really, really see people up front, not through a glass, what that's going to be like. We need to be able to leave space for that and for all those rumblings to occur, because it's going to be very different than what we've ever experienced. Thank you, Thalani, for sharing that.
Next up, we have Mackenzie Manning sharing from her group. Mackenzie, you are unmuted.
Hi, good morning. So the major theme that we talked about was about how vulnerability is courageous. And we came up with a few different examples, but they were all very much centered around embracing change and putting yourself out there, right? Some people suggested conversations about how retirement is vulnerable and changing into that period of one's life. Participating in professional development opportunity is vulnerable. Standing up for one's staff, even to the point of potentially stepping down from a position, is very vulnerable and courageous at the same time. And we all agreed that vulnerability demonstrated a level of trust that then allowed employees or other team members to reciprocate that vulnerability.
Thank you for saying that. What's interesting is that you said embracing change. Vulnerability really is in some ways, it's like change management. Change management is the people side of change and being able to navigate all the phases of change. There was an article in Harvard Business Review, and it said that we are experiencing a collective grief. We're kind of going through a grief process because there's things that we're losing, and things that, things were this way for a while. We're in grief over not being able to go to restaurants. We're in grief because everything has changed. And navigating that and helping your folks navigating that and understanding where they may be in that curve, I think will be exceptionally important. But thank you, Mackenzie.
Next up, Howard Garvel. I'll be unmuting you, Howard.
Hello, Howard.
Hi, Karen. Great presentation. Good morning, everyone.
Go on.
We had a great group talking about vulnerability as risk. One example of concern about potential violence, but going to the March on Washington and to hear Martin Luther King and the mother being courageous to do that and taking a middle school child. We heard about direct reports risking vulnerability and how the supervisor found they ended up respecting them even more for that. And we also heard about standing up for something that was wrong, that wasn't Pono, and really doing the right thing. And it took a risk, but they did it. And we also heard about a great, in this case, female leader, a woman who was modeling by saying what she didn't know, and it created a great leadership team. So those are some of the examples that I thought were terrific that were shared this morning.
Okay, and thank you for sharing that, Howard. I think if we sum it all up, I think understanding your values and being clear on what they are. And when was the last time you said, okay, these 3 values are important to me, and these are the values that I want to stand on, and understanding those, I think it's exceptionally important, because when you know your values, you'll know when you're out of alignment. You'll feel it. You'll have that spidey sense. When your spidey sense is tingling, make sure you pay attention to that, because it's your values rising and telling you something is not right. But understand your values and stand.
Next up, we have Katie Blint from Group 6. Katie, you're unmuted.
Hey, everybody. We talked a lot about the courage of others, leaders, coworkers, and ourselves. And in every instance, people took chances to talk about tragedies in their lives or challenges. And yet going on and needing the help of others to get there, to go on. And it was, you know, the rising, falling, and rising again that you talked about earlier, and bringing others up with you, whether it was mass layoffs in a corporate setting and realizing that people needed information and the ability to plan and reaching out to leaders and connecting them with those people so that they ended up with a good sense of morale, a good sense of themselves in order to go on. Taking a risk and asking questions where you thought, maybe I'm not going to like the answer, or I'll create an awkward situation, and finding inspiration and great courage underneath that risk. But all great examples, and I hear it echoed in everyone else's report outs, but just valuable sharing among people.
Okay, I love
Thanks for the
that.
exercise.
And a good point you made is about asking questions. Good leaders ask questions, and not necessarily tied to the answer, but asking questions where so people can feel seen, heard, and valued. I think that that's absolutely critical for positive culture. Thank you, Katie.
So Karen, we do still have a number of groups that haven't reported out. We may not be able to get to everyone today. Do you have a couple more you want to hear from?
Can we hear for just maybe one more? And if by chance we did not hear from your group and it's something that you think is important enough that you want us to know, send an email to me, and I'll find a way to respond to it, or maybe what we can do is either capture it in a post-webinar email of some sort.
Perfect, thanks. So Joya Zach is going to be reporting out from her group this morning. Joya, you're unmuted.
Hi, Joya.
Good morning. Good morning. I'll be quick. So we summarized that vulnerability leads to cooperation. It is a delicate balance between emotional and thoughtful action. And as I was listening to the stories in our group and what people have been reporting back, I was thinking about how the perception of vulnerability, and when you or someone else feels vulnerable, sometimes another person sees courage. And one of the things in our group was that someone said they felt vulnerable being silly and goofy in front of children, and even felt vulnerable in a marriage proposal. And I see that as a courageous act. So,
yes, thank you. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for participating in the group discussions and having vulnerable discussions with each other. And, you know, and let this be a vulnerability practice. And I want to leave you with this quote, and then I'll turn it over to Ted. Vulnerability doesn't come after trust, it precedes it. Leaping into the unknown, when done alongside others, causes the solid ground of trust to materialize beneath our feet. We were never meant to do it alone. So let's Pono, my friends. Can we say it together? Pono! Jazz hands, Pono. So I can say. I love it. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Ted, want to close?
I want to thank you, Karen, very much for keeping us stimulated, engaged, smiling, for eliciting vulnerable responses from us. I particularly know that some in the room actually shared their own stories, not just stories of others. And if I may make one comment, I think that maybe vulnerability and trust, they're twins. Maybe they're part of triplets, because I think courage is part of that trifecta. I heard that come up often during our discussion. And I've often said that if you want to distinguish leaders from everybody else, it may be courage. You know, we believe that the ability to lead exists within all of us, but the difference between those who lead and those who don't often is courage, and the courage to actually act in vulnerable ways, ways that cause us to take risks. So thank you for underscoring all of those points today, Karen, and thank you all for joining in the conversation. We've got a few upcoming events. But before we remind you of those, again, another thank you to COCC for underwriting this year's series. Thank you, COCC, and to all of the visionary sponsors who came forth this year to support the work that Leadership Greater Hartford does on behalf of our members, our friends, and our entire community. So next week, next Thursday, tune in for the climax. Doe Henshaw will bring it all together. And the theme of her presentation will be, We Believe. So have faith that it will be a terrific way to close out this year's series. Thank you, Dr. Doe. And the following week, we will have a friend from Florida, Akeem Nawak, will be returning to the Connecticut area virtually. And he will be the second in a new series that we're sponsoring as part of our Leading in the New Now. You won't want to miss Akeem. He is one of the finest presenters nationally, a profound speaker and author. So tune in and tell all of your friends about Doe's presentation next week, Akeem's the following week, and join us again if you can.